Bassist Victor Wooten put it best. The bass player is the most powerful person in the band. We decide what the chords are. That sounds like a bass player bragging, but musically, it's actually true. If the band plays a C major chord and the bass player plays an A, congratulations. The audience is now hearing A minor 7. And here's the weird part. Most musicians spend years learning theory, practicing licks, studying modes, and their music still sounds like every other generic song. Bass players? Somehow they skip all that and write music that sticks for decades. I'm talking about people like Paul McCartney, Sting, Charles Mingus, Esperanza Spalding. These musicians didn't just support the band, they built it from the ground up. So here's the question for you. If you play bass, are you secretly writing better songs than your bandmates? And guitarists, keyboardists, singers, I want to hear your defense. Comment below before we continue. Because yes, this is going to get a little competitive. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what makes bass players different, how they think, how they build mood, story, and emotional impact into music. And at the end, there's a challenge where you will take these principles and apply them to your own music. Paul McCartney once said something fascinating about writing music. I'm of the school of the instinctive. I think the theory is good. First thought, best thought. It doesn't always work, but as a general idea, I will try and do that. Now, when he said theory, he wasn't talking about music theory. He meant the theory that your first instinct is often the right one. And that's something bass players learn very quickly. Because when you're holding down the bottom of the music, you don't have time to overthink. You have to feel where the music wants to go. Meanwhile, guitar players are opening 3 theory books, 2 YouTube tabs, and a Reddit thread. And after all that analysis, they still end up playing the same lick. Now, don't get me wrong. Music theory is incredibly useful. You should absolutely know things like modal interchange, secondary dominance, chromatic mediance, tritone substitutions, modulation, all those beautiful tools. But here's the funny thing. If you sit down and you try to construct a great piece of music entirely with theory, you often end up stuck. But if you sit down and just play, something usually comes out. A riff, a motif, a progression, something that grabs you. And when that happens, you need to record it immediately. Even if it comes to you at 3 in the morning. Yes, that means getting out of bed. But your future self will thank you. Your spouse, maybe not. Of course, what grabs you may not grab me. That's what genres are for. Human beings need reference points. When people hear your music, they need to think, this reminds me of something. Not too much like something else, but enough that they understand it. And that's what theory really is. Theory is not a rule book for creating music. It's a set of descriptions for things that have worked in the past. In other words, theory is what happens when musicians try to reverse engineer inspiration. And that's why you should know it. But you should never become a slave to it. Because as Sting once said, the essence of all music is surprise. If I'm not surprised within the first 8 bars, I stop listening. Guitar players love surprise too, just that it usually shows up around bar 97. Human beings need 2 things in music: predictability and surprise. Too much predictability equals boredom. Too much unpredictability equals confusion. The perfect piece of music walks the line between the two, and that line is a moving target. If you want to surprise Sting, I think it's going to take a little more finesse to fascinate him than the typical 14 to 24-year-old pop listener who sees music as background noise and the occasional adrenaline boost. Not only do they represent different markets or genres, they also demand different levels of surprise in their music and different levels of sophistication in the creation of that surprise. They both want to feel they are listening to evolution, but they have different levels of acceptance as to how far and how fast that evolution occurs. The great designer Raymond Loewy had a name for this idea: Maya, most advanced yet acceptable. And a great example of that is the very first Police hit, Roxanne. I remember hearing this on the radio and thinking, WTF? What is that? You had these wonderfully odd reggae-inspired syncopated parts from Sting and Stuart Copeland on the bass and drums, and Andy Summers playing the straight man on guitar, keeping beat, basically. Reggae gone mainstream, rhythmically weird. Well, it was the perfect blend of the familiar and the unfamiliar, wasn't it? Or tonally, this riff from Demolition Man. Super repetitive and predictable, yes. But what the hell is the third doing there? Is it minor or major? And you get this little dopamine hit of surprise over and over again for 3 whole minutes. Because as Geddy Lee says, when you're writing, you're trying to create a mood, a feeling. And not necessarily a euphoric one. Harmony, melody, rhythm, arrangement, instrumentation, and all of the codified theory, structures, and formulas are mood-creating tools in your compositional arsenal. Take the intro to YYZ as example. Odd meter, dissonant tritone harmony, mechanical rhythm. The result? Tension, energy, anxiety. That sounds like a strange mood to want to create. But human beings are wired to pay attention to tension, conflict, danger, uncertainty. That's why journalists say, if it bleeds, it leads. It's why action and horror dominate film. And music can tap into the exact same instincts. It's generally not mainstream in music. The fact that Rush sold 40 to 45 million records worldwide, pushing these buttons, is a notable anomaly. But there are many people, a great many of them musicians, who appreciate complexity and virtuosity and who want to be stimulated by a wide spectrum of emotions. Mood is like perception. And throughout history and across cultures, humans have used rituals, substances, and physical practices like dance and music to shift their perception of reality. This was, and probably still is, my prime motivation in listening to and performing and even composing music. And our musical tastes are shaped early. There's something interesting about the first 3 albums you wore out. Not the 10th, not the 20th, the first 3. Those albums form a deep imprint on your musical taste. For me, it was these 3. And I'm curious, actually, what were the first 3 albums you wore out? Drop them in the comments. Those 3 records probably explain most of the music you love today. And they probably explain the kind of music you're going to write. Because, as Roger Waters once said, songwriting is about telling stories. Bass players tend to ask, what's the story? Guitar players ask, where do I solo? Look at classic albums like Dark Side of the Moon or The Wall. These albums work because they tell stories. Same with these albums. Look at the cover art. Even entirely instrumental music like Return to Forever. Look at the song titles. Medieval Overture, Sorceress, Majestic Dance, The Magician. These tunes are long and winding with multiple points of conflict and suspense, tension, and release. In fact, every composition that grabs us and won't let us go, from the simplest ballad to the most complex piece of fusion, must imply a narrative, must have a beginning, a middle, and an end, must pose a problem and a complication and resolution. And the tools we use as composers are simply ways of shaping that narrative. Dark Side of the Moon, for example. The entire album is glued together with motifs. That beating heart, that run through each song in some form or fashion. The recurring 1-4 chord progression you hear in the opening track. Breathe. And then again in Breathe Reprise, keeps coming back, same but different. Great Gig in the Sky, Brain Damage, Any Color You Like as well. They all contain that familiar motif. Rock opera before Queen. Logic serves the story and story serves emotion. Because as Charles Mingus said, music is a language of the emotions. Whenever I'm writing, I'm composing, I'm writing the way I feel. When bass players write, it's catharsis. When guitar players do, they buy another pedal. This one is huge. Writing music at its best is not about creating a commercial product. Composition at its best is therapy. It's a way we process our feelings about life, about what's happening in our lives in the moment. Try this little experiment. Watch a movie that touched you emotionally in some way. My wife thinks I'm an absolute nut because I'll cry at the stupidest ham-handed attempt. Just about any movie that tries to manipulate me succeeds. But pick a movie that really got you. Watch it again, but with the sound turned off. Subtitles on, sound off. I guarantee you that movie's power to impact you emotionally is gone entirely, completely wrecked. And so I think it comes down to honesty. I mean, listen to this Mingus strain. Charlie wrote that song in 1959 after the passing of his beloved mentor, Lester Young, who died of alcoholism at just 50 years of age. Legend has it, Mingus wrote this tune on the same night he heard the news, and it's full of sadness, grief, and love. Lester was rarely ever seen or heard without his signature wide-brimmed, flat-topped hat, hence the song title, Goodbye, Pork Pie Hat. Which brings us to something Esperanza Spalding once said. I like to create a world and then find the songs that live in that world. World building, mood creation, storytelling, emotion, self-expression, altered states of consciousness. Do you see the pattern emerging? Bass players like Mingus, McCartney, Sting, Spalding, and Waters aren't just supporting the music, they're building it from the ground up. And the interesting thing is, this isn't a talent, it's a skill, which means you can practice it. So here's today's challenge. Take a piece of music you've written and analyze it using these ideas. World building, mood creation, storytelling, emotion, surprise, or write something new using those principles. And to get things started, I'm going to go first. This tune came to me when I was watching a YouTube video about Genghis Khan. Or was it Attila the Hun? I can't remember. But what I realized as I was writing, it's actually more about me processing my emotions about what's going on right now in the world. Essentially a story about a whole bunch of us losing our frickin' minds all at the same time. The Mad Orange King, the exposed nexus of elite power, sex trafficking, and impunity. The horrors of war, human suffering, and Armageddon. Plenty to work with there. I'm sure you'll agree. And so I'm going to play it for you now and stop every once in a while and try to explain what's going on musically. So So I'm trying to build a world there, right? A horde of Mongolians charging majestically on horseback across the steppes. And did you know there's such a thing as a Mongolian scale? And I don't know who the hell invented the idea of calling the major pentatonic scale the Mongolian scale, because it just doesn't sound very warlike, does it? So I ended up using kind of a weird hybrid tonality, something of a cross between the Black Sabbath-inspired tritone-based thing I grew up on and this thing I learned from Olivier Messiaen Mode 4. And the Dorian mode of the harmonic minor also. And that forms a harmonic palette, if you will, for the entire song. Kind of a weird mix of east and west, symbolic of the horrific conflict between the two. And as I was working on this riff, I felt it needed a little something different. And so you'll notice this bar of 3/4 right here. And this gives it a little rhythmic spice or surprise every sixth bar throughout the entire tune. Subtle, not in your face, fog of war, confusion, but just a little, oh, what's that? Every 24 seconds. So that's the A piece of the tune. And this is the first time I'm listening to it after finalizing it a couple of weeks ago. And I think it does paint a pretty good picture of a marauding horde of Mongols hell-bent on rape, death, and pillage. But now that I'm listening to it with a little distance, I'm thinking that what I played there on the piccolo makes a pretty good theme that I should have repeated somewhere else in the song, but I don't think I ever did. So here's the B section. Now, that definitely sounds warlike to me, and I like the way it has that recurring little 3/4 blip in the timing, sticks out nicely. Now, the piccolo, the lead instrument at the moment, the one in the lower right, you can see that it is pretty free and untethered to the rest of the music rhythmically, but it comes back into tight lockstep every once in a while, like right there. And I think that quality, that free but locked in, makes the tune more accessible. Not just a mass of helter-skelter confusion that only a musical rocket scientist might appreciate. And that's my attempt at leveraging Raymond Loewy's Maya concept, most advanced yet acceptable. So we're just about to hit the bridge, the C section. And the sheer depth of this section strikes me as kind of weird. Those are some really low notes there on the bass. And the lead instrument is also, I'm going to say, an octave lower than usual. So it's definitely surprising. And it does sound good to me, but I wonder if it's a little much for some people. Well, it's definitely way too much for most people, but is it too much for my target market? I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it too much low end? Or is it good contrast with what came before? Tell me in the chat. Sounds like a conversation, a dialogue back and forth. The lead instrument in the lower left is making a plea to the rest of the instruments, bringing a number of different arguments to the table. And every time it's nope, case closed, don't even bother. You may or may not have noticed that in addition to the harmonic devices that got deployed here, there are also a number of rhythmic tricks, mixing rhythmic emphasis in a variety of different ways. Like here, for example, you can see that the beats are subdivided by 4 16th notes, but the emphasis is on every 7th note. And there are all kinds of these little surprises going on. Now that final chord is interesting. I wanted to use a major minor 7 chord, but I ended up playing the wrong one. I hit a G minor major 7 instead of a C. And when I realized that, I thought, oh, that's different. And what you're hearing is actually a G9 sharp 11 no third, and I left it. My writing process is basically this. First, I learn the theory, then I try to forget it. Then I play. Then afterward, I analyze what happened. So instinct and theory work together, which brings us back to the challenge. Take a piece of music you've written and analyze it through these ideas, or write something new using them. And if you want help with the theory side of this process, I've written an ebook called The Bass Player's Power Guide to Writing Music That Actually Moves People, where I'll show you a whole bunch of tactical tools and techniques, rhythmic tricks for injecting surprise and intrigue into your licks and riffs, rhythmic displacement, syncopation, augmentation, polyrhythm, mixed meter, subdivision changes, metric modulation, phrasing, motif development, and more. And harmonic tricks for invoking just the right mood and emotion, modal interchange, modulation, secondary dominance, chromatic mediants, tritone substitutions, and more. This new ebook is intended as both a static reference while you are contemplating a new piece of music, and also as an active tool set that widens the palette of tonal and rhythmic possibilities available to you as you are writing music in real time. And it is available for just $29 on my Patreon, but for a limited time, you can get it for free when you sign up at level 1, which is a fraction of that, or level 3, where you can send me your work for feedback and analysis. That's right. Send me an MP3 or MP4 of a tune that you've written or a performance that you've played, and I will critique it and give you some feedback on what you're doing well and how you can improve. Plus, you also get access to all of the past and future challenges available in level 1. So the link is below. Check it out now. If you don't see otherwise, the ebook is still free when you join level 1 or level 3, and we will email it to you as soon as you sign up. I'll see you in the shed.